The chateau stood on the outskirts of a small village, its crumbling walls framed by twisted vines that trailed over shattered windows. Wildflowers sprung up in patches of what remained of the overgrown courtyard, struggling to thrive within the ruins' own silent grandeur. Many walked past these ancient stones, lamenting how time had stolen the chateau's glory, but none ventured in. None, until one bright summer afternoon, when Aliana and Tristan both arrived, strangers at first, united by their curiosity and an invitation to restore a place long forgotten. Aliana was the first to step through the arched gateway. She carried a small canvas bag over her shoulder, filled with sketchbooks and horticultural guides. Her grandmother had once told her stories of the chateau's magical garden, rumored to be bursting with color and rare blooms in its heyday. As a child, Elena had reveled in those tales, imagining a hidden paradise behind high stone walls. Now, a budding garden historian, she was excited about the opportunity to dig into the past, literally and figuratively. Her wide eyes took in the old courtyard. The grand double doors of the main building were sealed shut by rusted chains, as if guarding the secrets that lay inside. She remembered reading an article about a local historical society that had just begun restoration work. A wave of hope had overcome her then. Finally, someone was willing to bring the chateau and its gardens back to life, and she was going to be part of it. She fantasized about tall rose bushes, the perfume of lilies, and ivy-draped terraces as she scanned the silent grounds. A crackle of gravel behind her made Elena turn. Standing at the entrance was another visitor, a young man wearing the slightest hint of uncertainty on his face. He had hair the color of toasted chestnuts, eyes that reflected a keen intelligence, and over his shoulder hung a camera bag. He came closer, pausing when he noticed Lena. They exchanged a polite, almost awkward nod, neither sure how to begin. "Are you with the restoration team?" he asked softly. Lifting the camera strap into a more comfortable position, Alina offered a small smile. "I am, or at least I'm here to volunteer if they'll have me. I have a background in horticulture and historical research. I'm Tristan." He lifted his camera as if to explain why he was there. "I'm a photographer. I heard about the project and wanted to capture the process. There's something so compelling about new life blooming among old ruins." "Alina," she responded, holding out her hand. Tristan's handshake was gentle, almost hesitant. There was something quietly earnest about him that immediately put her at ease. They ventured deeper into the courtyard together, wandering until they found a small group of volunteers near the old stables. The project coordinator, an older woman named Mariam Lefebvre, registered them, ticking her pen over a clipboard with a swift efficiency. She offered them each a modest space to work, the neglected walled garden behind the east wing of the chateau. She explained that it had once been a magnificent horticultural showpiece, but had completely fallen to ruin. The other volunteers were occupied in different sections, so Elena and Tristan would largely be on their own. Excited, but also somewhat daunted, they crossed the weed-choked stones, pushing aside a rusty gate to reveal the overgrown remains of what looked like the skeleton of a glorious garden. Tangled briars and nettles formed a daunting barrier. Gnarled rose bushes, long abandoned, had scrambled across broken statues and decaying stone benches. Yet beyond the thicket, they could make out the outlines of intricate pathways and a few clusters of flowers bravely clinging to life. They set to work, Alina systematically clipping and pruning, Tristan snapping photos of each step, even daring to participate in the more physical tasks when Alina needed help. As the sun arched overhead, they discovered hidden patterns beneath the weeds. Ornate mosaic tiles lay broken but still recognizable under layers of dirt. When drizzle threatened, they sheltered under a leaning gazebo, huddled close to avoid getting wet, discussing the shapes they could see emerging. Alina's excitement was infectious. Tristan found himself intrigued by every leaf and flower she identified. "It's amazing how resilient they are," she said, kneeling in the damp earth. "If we can just clear away the debris and let in some sunlight, these plants might regain their former beauty." Tristan crouched beside her, holding the camera to his eye and capturing her intent expression. When he lowered it, he paused to look at her. You have this light in your eyes, like you believe in the possibility hiding under all the vines and rotted wood. Alina smiled at him, a dreamy wonder lighting her face in return. She dusted off her gloves. I do. You can't see it now, but someday this garden could be everything it once was, a testament to the passion and artistry that built it. By the third day of clearing stubborn weeds and thorny branches, they were exhausted, yet it was a pleasant sort of fatigue, fueled by discovery. Late that afternoon, while scraping away at an old stone bench, Alina's fingers happened upon a tarnished metal latch. Nearby, Tristan was photographing a cluster of resilient poppies that had sprung to life in a mossy corner. She called him over, her voice vibrating with excitement. Look at this, Alina said. There's something hidden under this bench, some kind of compartment. Together they lifted the heavy stone seat and confirmed that beneath it was a shallow box, nearly merged with the rubble. Using cautious prods, they freed it. It was a small chest, sealed tight with rusted hinges. They carried it to a less overgrown area and pried the lid open, their breath catching at what lay inside. A stack of delicate letters, carefully bound together by a faded ribbon. Tristan lifted the topmost envelope and examined the elegant scrawl. Whoever wrote these had impeccable penmanship. He carefully slipped the parchment from the envelope, revealing flowing lines of French so old-fashioned that it was nearly poetry. It's signed Margot. I can't make out the last name. Alina leaned over his shoulder to peer at the script. Her cheek nearly brushed his arm. It must be the chateau's former owner, she breathed. I remember reading about a certain Margot de Fèvre who lived here a century ago. She was greatly admired in the village, and rumor is she had quite a romantic story tied to these gardens. They read one letter together, the words describing beloved blossoms, the blush of rose petals, and a longing to preserve the memory of someone dear. Though neither said it aloud, they both felt a gentle stirring of emotion, as though the garden they were restoring had once been the stage for a love that transcended time. Over the following days, Tristan photographed not only the progress in the garden, but also each letter, planning to document them as part of the chateau's history. Alina began poring over the lines, attempting to piece together Margot's story. Wrapping slender vines out of her way, she would recite some of the more poetic excerpts in soft whispers. Tristan was no great romantic before, but the notion of a love so ardent that it wove itself into every flower made his heart ache in ways he hadn't expected. As the hours in the garden turned into weeks, Alina and Tristan's companionship steadily grew. The shared labor turned from a necessity to a pleasure, their conversation drifting from the garden's needs to each other's favorite foods, childhood memories, and random stories that made them laugh. One morning, Alina discovered that Tristan had placed a thermos of jasmine tea on a mossy step near her work area, accompanied by an extra paper cup. When she glanced his way, he only gave a small nod, turning back to photograph a border of newly uncovered stones. It was a small gesture, but it sent a soft warmth through her. It reminded her of how a single bud can open into a breathtaking bloom. When breaks came, they would sit upon a newly cleared bench, savoring the hush of the chateau's walls around them. Sometimes they shared an unspoken conversation, how the place embodied longing, how love once lived in these same shadows. Although they could not name it, they sensed a parallel between the blossoms that fought to reclaim the sunlight and the slow blossoming of emotion between them. Each day brought new signs of renewal. A bud they had worried was dead suddenly opened. A path that had been blocked by thorny brambles was cleared, revealing a hidden fountain. And each day, too, new glances and gentle touches passed between Alina and Tristan, brief but meaningful. They found themselves inevitably drawn to the letters, reading them in order to discover the rest of Margot's story. Gradually, the narrative unfolded. Margot, a young mistress of the chateau, had fallen for a foreign traveler. Their affections grew in the labyrinth of hedges and whispering roses, but their worlds divided them. Margot poured her longing into letters, hoping that her beloved would one day return from his distant homeland. The garden was her sanctum, a place of dreams and hope when all else felt lost. Alina and Tristan read each line with aching hearts, and more than once paused to reflect on how easily one might lose love if not cherished. On the last day of the second week, Madame Lefebvre inspected their progress closely. She praised their dedication. The brambles were clipped, paving stones partially cleared, and some of the original flower beds were restored to a semblance of order. Seeing the two so happily engrossed in the work, she mentioned that part of the job would soon involve exploring the main building, double checking access points for the walled garden. Alina perked up at the opportunity. Tristan, too, seemed eager to see more of the chateau's mysteries. 2 days later, they stood before the main doors, hacking through ivy that clung stubbornly to every cranny. Inside, the hall was dim, and they had to use flashlights to navigate piles of old furniture draped in sheets. Dust motes swirled in the beams of sunlight coming through cracks in the shutters, lending an air of ghostly reverence. After some aimless wandering, they found a corridor that led them closer to the eastern wing, a vantage point that would let them see the garden from an upper floor. They ascended a spiral staircase, the iron steps groaning under their weight. Eventually, they reached a corridor lined with tall windows, mostly boarded up from outside. One window was partially open, letting in the green glow of the garden below. The sight of their hard work from that height made Alina grin. She pushed away one of the boards, allowing more sunlight to flood the corridor. Tristan directed his camera to capture the interplay of rubble and light across the floor. Further along the hall, they discovered a private study. Alina's heart thumped at the thought of stumbling upon more personal traces of Margot. And sure enough, positioned against an ornate wooden desk, they found a faded portrait. The title beneath read, Margot de Feff, 1895. It depicted a striking woman with dark wavy hair, holding a single rose in her hand. Alina put a hand to her mouth. That's her. It has to be. She looks haunted, Tristan observed, focusing his camera on the vibrant yet sorrowful gaze captured by the portrait. You can see the longing in her eyes. A hush settled between them. Alina placed her flashlight on the desk, noticing the remains of a dried rose pressed between two broken shards of glass behind the frame, as if someone had once placed it there for safekeeping. Could this have been Margot's final memento of her elusive lover? She glanced at Tristan. Sometimes I think we've stumbled into someone else's dream. I wonder if she ever saw him again. He set the camera aside for a moment. I wonder if they found a way to heal the distance between them. Their eyes met, and for a moment, the hush around them seemed to cradle something precious. Suddenly, a gust of wind rattled through the corridor, extinguishing the delicate moment. They returned downstairs, hearts fluttering with thoughts of what might have been. Yet as they emerged, the vibrant patch of garden they had unearthed offered a comforting sight, reminding them about hope hidden in unexpected places. One morning, not long after exploring the study, Alina arrived earlier than usual and found Tristan kneeling by a rose bush they had trimmed a few days before. A single pearly bud had unfurled into a perfect bloom overnight, its petals dewy and radiant in the morning light. Tristan was photographing it from different angles, oblivious to Alina's presence. She watched him for a moment, appreciating his diligence, then quietly approached. It's beautiful, isn't it? He nearly knocked his camera against the stone, but steadied himself. You startled me. A shy laugh escaped him, and he stood up, brushing dirt from his knees. Yes, it is beautiful. It feels like a small miracle. They stared at the flower together, the fragrant air brimming with possibility. Alina noticed his hand lingering close to hers, and an unspoken tension hummed. In a sudden, impulsive move, she reached out and touched his fingertips. His hand enveloped hers, and in that soft moment, she felt something bloom between them that neither had initially planned. While the garden flourished under careful restoration, the letters they had found drew them further into Margot's love story. Late one afternoon, after tidying their tools, they sat on an old bench and flipped through a final unopened letter. The line spoke of hope dashed by war, of a fiancé who had departed and might never return, and of Margot's vow to maintain the garden as a symbol of endurance. It seemed she never heard a resolution, no closure mentioned in the letters. The last lines were a promise. As long as the garden lives, love still breathes. Eyes stinging, Alina folded the letter closed. Tristan exhaled slowly. They sat in silence, absorbing the heartbreak that had once seeped into these same paths. At last, Tristan turned to Alina, voice hushed. It's sad, but also, there's a beauty in how she never gave up hope. Alina nodded, feeling tears prick the back of her eyes. We may never know if her beloved returned. Maybe her story ended in heartbreak, or maybe it continued in ways that weren't recorded. But I believe that a love this deep leaves something behind, like an imprint that helps future gardens grow. They gazed around them. The late afternoon sun cast a warm glow on new shoots that sprouted where brambles once choked the soil. A breeze rustled overhead, carrying the gentle sound of leaves stirring into song. In that moment, Alina felt a shift like the echo of Margot's longing, drifting gently toward completion, but now it moved through them. Her heart raced at the thought that maybe, in forging this connection to the past, she and Tristan had found something of their own in the present. He lifted a hand to brush a lock of hair from her cheek, and the simple gesture set her pulse fluttering. A few more weeks passed, brightening the garden further. Stone pathways were now mostly clear. Rows of roses and lilies swayed in agreement with the newly restored spirit of the place. And a team of volunteers had joined Alina and Tristan to handle larger tasks. The garden was reawakening. Reports came in that local tourists were curious to see it, that the Historical Society was praising the swift progress. Meanwhile, Alina and Tristan found chances to slip away together, each reluctant to let the day end without seeing how the other was faring. One evening, after most of the crew had left, Alina stayed behind to catalog a new wave of roses they'd planted. Tristan lingered too, his camera huddled close. The late sun turned the sky a mix of flaming orange and lavender. Alina straightened from her inspection of the petals, noticing him a short distance away. The lens pointed east, where the cracked gates of the chateau glowed in the sunset. It's so tranquil now, she remarked, drawing near. When we started, it felt like a maze of thorns and brambles, like it might never be saved. He lowered his camera and caught the tender sparkle in her eyes. I guess it's proof that patience and care can restore just about anything that's been broken. They stood, breathing in the hush. An impulse stirred in Alina that she could no longer deny. Turning to face Tristan fully, she placed her hand gently on his cheek. The fading sunlight wrapped them in a shimmering embrace. And then, in the fragrant hush of the garden they had revived, she rose on tiptoe and kissed him. It was soft and tentative, like the opening of a flower in dawn light. Yet beneath that initial hesitation, a deeper warmth unfurled. Tristan responded, heart thudding in his chest, as he gently pulled her closer. Time slowed, and the wind rustling through the restored rose bushes seemed to whisper its approval. When they finally parted, Alina's cheeks were flushed, but she smiled, a radiant, honest smile that lit her from within. Tristan's eyes shone with emotion, as if the moment had completed a story begun by the Chateau's ghosts. They both knew that something important had taken root. Their routine carried on the next day, yet everything felt new. Alina catalogued buds with more pep in her step, while Tristan captured every sparkling droplet of dew from the vantage of a man celebrating life. The letters of Margot, they had discovered, seemed to hold fresh meaning. The chateau's tragic love had, in some intangible way, paved a path for something warmer to bloom in the present. Eventually, the day came when the garden was considered officially reopened for viewing. Madame Lefebvre organized a small ceremony, inviting the local villagers, historians, and architecture enthusiasts. to witness how the old walled enclosure had been transformed. Candles were placed along the stone paths that led to a newly refurbished fountain in the center. Fresh bouquets of roses adorned the marble statues. Alina and Tristan, hand in hand for once, took a moment to drink in the sight of their shared labor. When the visitors arrived, they marveled at the gardens, praising the dedicated volunteers. Alina offered guided tours, explaining which plants had been rediscovered and their significance. Tristan's photographs were displayed in the main hall of the chateau, telling the story from decrepit undergrowth to vibrant renewal. The visitors gravitated toward the images. Some felt the echoes of history behind every captured angle. After the day's activities wound down, Alina and Tristan found themselves in a quieter corner of the garden, near the bench where they had first uncovered Margot's letter. The chests of letters had been donated to the local archives, ensuring Margot's heartbreak and hope would live on in recorded history. Alina spoke softly, her tone pensive. I feel like those letters hold the chateau's heart. Maybe someone else, decades from now, will read them and feel how deeply love can take root. Tristan leaned closer, pressing his palm gently against hers. I hope whoever reads them finds that love still blossoms here, because it does, even now. He squeezed her hand, and a knowing, tender smile passed between them as they recalled their own first spark in these very grounds. Under the soft hush of dusk, they sat side by side, letting the fragrance of newly bloomed lilies drift around them. Alina angled her head, resting it on Tristan's shoulder as he wrapped an arm around her. The sky above was painted in muted colors, and every breath carried the sweetness of the garden's floral melody. It was a far cry from the chaotic wilderness it had been just weeks before. In its place stood an elegant testament to renewal and to possibilities not so easily forsaken. Without speaking, both understood how fragile and valuable their connection was. What had begun as a shared project to unveil the past had transformed into an opportunity for them to create something beautiful for the future. The spirit of Margot, her devotion to this garden, felt present that evening, quietly blessing the union that grew among the blossoms. The old chateau, once lifeless and forgotten, now cradled a romance as tender as the petals they had nourished back to life. In the weeks that followed, they returned often, sometimes to continue refining small sections of the gardens, sometimes just to sit on the repaired stone steps and watch the sunset over the estate's ancient turrets. Tristan snapped countless photos of Alina as she worked or contemplated the reborn flowers, capturing contented smiles that had become part of her daily expression. Alina began drafting a scholarly piece about the chateau's horticultural history, weaving in references to Margot's letters as well as Tristan's photography. Yet for all the external changes, the greatest transformation lay in themselves. Each day they shaped the garden was a day they cemented their partnership, forging trust, laughter, and tenderness. The brambles that had once choked everything slowly became a memory, replaced by lush greenery and carefully planted buds. The neglected corners were no longer dreary realms of solitude, but rather subtle reminders that even forgotten spaces can become sites of renewal. One evening, long after the official unveiling, they came to the chateau with a small picnic basket, a moment of solace away from the world. Alina spread out a blanket under the boughs of a newly planted apple tree, while Tristan lit a few lanterns to illuminate the dusk. They chatted quietly about their individual dreams. Her desire to curate gardens for historic landmarks worldwide, his aspiration to publish a photography book that showcased the resilience of abandoned places reborn. And somehow, woven into all those dreams, they found each other. Night deepened, and the chateau walls loomed gently around them, no longer threatening but comforting, like guardians of a secret. At one point, Tristan turned to Alina with a thoughtful expression. Why do you think Margot's letters brought us together here? Alina paused, gazing up at the silhouette of the chateau against the moonlit sky. Margot believed that a love that plants seeds of hope never really disappears. Maybe she needed someone to carry that hope forward, to finish what she started. We found each other in the middle of it all. He nodded, gently brushing her hair behind her ear. We'll bring a happy ending to this story, or at least a new chapter. With that, he leaned in to kiss her again, softer than the night breeze rustling through the orchard. Far off in the distance, the cracked turrets and time-worn stones stood watch, as though they approved of this modern blossoming. In that quiet, star-dappled moment, the garden embraced the lovers it had gently nurtured. The ancient letters did not demand a resolution. They had already done their work. Margot's faith in the power of the chateau's garden had soared forward in time, uniting two hearts courageous enough to unearth beauty where others saw only ruin. Days turned into weeks, then into months. The restoration continued, but the garden no longer felt abandoned. Visitors wandered the paths, volunteers maintained the flower beds, and old walls rang with new laughter. Whispers of new life stirred in every corner. And in the midst of it all, Alina and Tristan nurtured their bond, grateful for fate's guiding hand. Sometimes, Alina would glance up from a bed of newly planted peonies and find Tristan's gaze, his camera lowered, a gentle gleam in his eyes that spoke volumes without words. Other times, Tristan would be adjusting his lens in the hush of morning light, only to look down and discover Alina at his side, smiling in quiet devotion. In the end, the garden's rescue was more than just a historical restoration. It was proof that even the most fractured spaces, left untended for decades, can blossom again with the right care. Love, like seeds buried under dense soil, needs only a spark of hope to awaken. Through patience, intention, and a willingness to see possibility where others only see decay, miracles can be coaxed from the smallest shoots. And so, the story written a century before, in Margot's letters, lived on, breathing through the refurbished paths and carefully pruned roses. It lived in the gentle steps of visitors transplanted by the garden's tranquil allure. Most tenderly, it thrived in the hearts of the two people who had uncovered its secret messages. Alina and Tristan, once strangers to each other, had discovered in the chateau ruins a quiet realm where longing could bloom into fulfillment, where love could take hold and flourish against all odds. In the twilight of each day they spent at the chateau, they would pause to exchange a look, remembering how the first glimpses of green and that hidden box of letters had steered them here. Amid ancient stone and reawakened blossoms, they had found a bond that, like the garden, would keep growing with each passing season, and if ever they doubted, they needed only to brush a hand along the brambles parted or the mosaic fountain restored, and recall how beauty can resurface from time's debris. They had, after all, become living proof that sometimes fate itself blooms among the ruins.